On July 20th, 1976, NASA's Viking 1 orbiter captured an image that would haunt humanity for decades. As the spacecraft passed over a region of Mars called Cydonia, its cameras recorded something that seemed impossible. There, rising from the red Martian surface, was what appeared to be a massive face staring up at the cosmos. A face that looked unmistakably human. The image was grainy, shadowed, mysterious, but the proportions were there. 2 eyes, a nose, a mouth. The face on Mars, as it quickly became known, measured almost 2 miles from end to end. If it was real, if it was truly artificial, then someone or something had carved it there. But who? And more importantly, when? NASA dismissed it almost immediately. A trick of light and shadow, they said. Pareidolia, the human tendency to see faces in random patterns. Just rocks, shaped by wind and time. But here is where the story gets interesting, because the face on Mars was not alone. Surrounding this enormous structure were other formations, geometric shapes that did not look natural. Pyramids, multiple pyramids, arranged in patterns that seemed deliberate, purposeful. The largest of these Martian pyramids sat approximately 10 miles from the face itself, positioned in a way that suggested connection, relationship, design. Scientists and researchers began analyzing the Cydonia complex with increasing fascination. They measured angles. They calculated proportions. They mapped the positions of these structures relative to each other. And what they found was disturbing in its implications. The pyramids at Cydonia were arranged in alignment with specific celestial coordinates. The angles between them reflected mathematical constants, the same kind of advanced geometrical relationships found in only one other place in our solar system, Earth, specifically the Giza Plateau in Egypt. Now, before we go any further, think about what this means. We have pyramids on Mars, we have pyramids on Earth. Both sets seem to encode advanced mathematical knowledge. Both seem to align with stellar coordinates. The statistical probability of this being coincidence begins to shrink dramatically. Let me give you something even more specific. The angle 19.5 degrees appears repeatedly in both locations. At Cydonia, major structures align along this latitude. At Giza, shafts inside the Great Pyramid point to specific stars at angles incorporating this same measurement, 19.5 degrees. It shows up in the placement of the monuments. It shows up in their internal architecture. This is not a casual number. In physics, it represents something called the tetrahedral latitude, a point of maximum energy exchange on a rotating sphere. Ancient Egyptian builders, working with copper tools and stone hammers in 2500 BC, somehow encoded this advanced mathematical constant into structures that would last millennia. Or did they? What if they were not the original builders at all? What if they inherited these designs from someone else? Someone who had already perfected this knowledge somewhere else before bringing it to Earth. The Great Pyramid at Giza weighs approximately 6 million tons. It contains roughly 2.3 million stone blocks, some weighing up to 70 tons each. It was aligned to true north with an accuracy of 3/60ths of a single degree. The ancient Egyptians supposedly accomplished this without the wheel, without iron tools, without any technology we would recognize as advanced. The structure encodes the mathematical constant pi in its dimensions. It encodes the golden ratio. It serves as a scale model of the northern hemisphere of Earth. And according to mainstream archaeology, it was built as a tomb with no mummy, no treasure, no hieroglyphics explaining its purpose. Just empty chambers and shafts pointing at stars. The same stars that the Cydonia structures on Mars seem to reference. Orion, Sirius, the belt stars that ancient Egyptians called the dwelling place of Osiris, their god of resurrection and the afterlife. The Egyptians did not just build monuments, they built a message. They encoded information into stone that would survive any catastrophe, any loss of knowledge, any dark age that might come. But what if that information was a memory? What if the pyramids on Earth were built by survivors who remembered another home, another world where they had built the same structures before everything fell apart? Look at the evidence without bias for just a moment. We have structures on 2 different planets, separated by millions of miles of empty space, sharing architectural similarities and mathematical relationships. We have ancient texts from Egypt describing their gods as coming from the stars. We have no satisfactory explanation for how primitive civilizations accomplished engineering feats that challenge modern capabilities. We have a planet, Mars, that scientists now confirm once had liquid water, a thick atmosphere, and potentially habitable conditions. And then something happened to Mars, something catastrophic. The atmosphere was stripped away, the water disappeared, the magnetic field collapsed, the planet died. But what if it did not die empty? What if there was time to leave? Time to take the knowledge, the culture, the survivors, and seed them somewhere else? Somewhere with blue skies and flowing water, and the chance to start again? Here is what we know for certain. Mars once had everything necessary for complex life to develop. Earth has pyramids and ancient structures that defy simple explanations. Both locations share specific mathematical and astronomical alignments. Ancient human cultures consistently describe their civilizing gods as coming from the sky. I am Mr. H, and I have spent years exploring the mysteries that mainstream history cannot or will not explain. If you are someone who questions the official narrative, who believes there is more to our past than we have been told, then you have found the right place. This is Mystery History for Sleep, where we dive deep into the rabbit holes that connect ancient mysteries, lost civilizations, and the possibility that humanity's story is far stranger and more profound than we have ever imagined. Make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell, because what we are about to explore together will challenge everything you thought you knew about where we come from. Now, let me ask you a question. What if the pyramids on Earth are not monuments to the dead, but monuments to the departed? What if they mark not where we are going, but where we came from? What if Mars was not our future destination, but our ancient home? And what if the builders of the pyramids were not primitive humans struggling with stone and rope, but the last survivors of a Martian civilization, encoding their final testament into the only material that could survive the ages? Stone, mathematics, astronomy, the eternal sciences that transcend planets and cultures. The face on Mars stares upward into space. The pyramids of Giza point toward Orion, and between them lies a story that, if true, would rewrite everything we think we know about human origins, about consciousness, about our place in the cosmos. We are not just looking at archaeological mysteries. We might be looking at a message from our ancestors, carved into two worlds, waiting for us to finally understand. Are we ready to read it? Mars was not always the frozen, lifeless desert we see today. This is not speculation. This is scientific fact confirmed by decades of robotic exploration and mountains of data collected by NASA, the European Space Agency, and multiple Mars missions. The question is not whether Mars once had conditions suitable for life. The question is, what happened to that life? And did any of it escape before the planet died? In 2015, NASA announced something that made headlines around the world but was quickly forgotten by most people. They confirmed, definitively, that liquid water still flows on Mars today. Not ancient, dried-up riverbeds, but actual liquid water, flowing down crater walls during the Martian summer. If liquid water exists now, on a planet with almost no atmosphere and brutal surface conditions, imagine what Mars was like billions of years ago when it had a thick atmosphere, moderate temperatures, and vast oceans covering much of its northern hemisphere. The MAVEN mission, which arrived at Mars in September 2014, gave us the answer to one of the planet's greatest mysteries. Where did the atmosphere go? The data showed that Mars once had an atmosphere as thick as Earth's, possibly thicker, but around 3.7 billion years ago, the planet's magnetic field collapsed. Without that protective shield, solar wind began stripping away the atmosphere at a catastrophic rate. Over millions of years, Mars lost 99% of its air. The oceans evaporated into space. The rivers dried up. The planet froze. But here is what matters for our investigation. That process took time, millions of years. If intelligent life had developed on Mars during its habitable period, there would have been time to see the catastrophe coming. Time to adapt, to build shelters underground, to develop technology, to plan an exodus. Time to leave. Now let us talk about what exists on Mars right now. Structures that should not be there if Mars has always been a dead rock shaped only by wind and geology. The Cydonia region is just the beginning. In an area called Elysium, satellite imagery has revealed what appears to be a pyramid complex. Not one pyramid. Multiple pyramids arranged in geometric patterns. These are not small formations. Some of these structures rise hundreds of feet above the surrounding terrain. Their sides show angles and edges that remain sharp despite billions of years of supposed erosion. Their faces align with cardinal directions. Their positions relative to each other form mathematical relationships. Mainstream planetary geologists explain these formations as natural mesas, carved by wind and water over geological timescales. But when researchers apply the same analytical techniques used to identify archaeological sites on Earth, the results become harder to dismiss. The structures show symmetry. They show repeated angles. They show preferential positioning on high ground with clear sightlines to each other. In the region called Galaxious Chaos, orbital cameras have photographed what researchers nicknamed the Inca City. It is a rectangular formation stretching for miles, with straight edges, right angles, and internal divisions that look disturbingly like city blocks or agricultural plots. NASA's explanation is that these are sand dunes shaped by wind patterns. But sand dunes do not typically form perfect right angles. They do not create long, straight walls extending for kilometers. They do not organize themselves into grid patterns. The Mars Reconnaissance Orbiter, equipped with the most advanced camera ever sent to another planet, has captured thousands of high-resolution images showing anomalies that defy easy explanation. There are formations that look like collapsed archways, structures that resemble tumbled columns, patterns on crater floors that suggest tiling or paving. Most of these images are publicly available. NASA publishes them without comment, leaving interpretation to individual observers. And this is where the controversy intensifies. When independent researchers enhance these images, apply different filters, or examine them at different angles, details emerge that the raw images obscure. Shadows reveal depth and dimension. Texture analysis suggests surfaces that are too smooth, too uniform, to be natural rock. Geometric analysis reveals patterns that repeat across multiple sites, suggesting common design principles. Take the so-called D and M pyramid in Cydonia. It is a five-sided structure, nearly 2 miles across at its base, rising almost half a mile above the surrounding plain. Five-sided pyramids are exceptionally rare in nature. They require specific mathematical relationships between angles and proportions. Yet this formation maintains bilateral symmetry. Its edges align with other structures in the Cydonia complex. When researchers calculated the angles between the D and M pyramid, the face, and other nearby formations, they found astronomical alignments, matching specific stellar configurations, as they would have appeared from Mars's surface thousands or millions of years ago. Could this all be coincidence? Could wind and water, acting randomly over billions of years, create multiple structures that just happen to encode mathematical constants, astronomical alignments, and geometric relationships? Statistically, the probability approaches zero. But proving artificial origin requires more than probability. It requires going there, drilling into these structures, examining them up close. And that has not happened yet. What we do have are the measurements, the data, the positions recorded by orbital instruments that cannot lie, and those measurements keep showing patterns that nature does not typically produce. Consider the issue of erosion. Mars has been subjected to billions of years of harsh conditions, dust storms that circle the entire planet, temperature swings of over 150 degrees between day and night, meteor impacts that leave craters hundreds of miles wide. Any structures on the surface should be worn smooth, buried under dust, or completely obliterated. Yet in Cydonia, in Elysium, in dozens of other locations, we see formations with sharp edges, defined angles, and clear geometric shapes. This suggests either these structures are far younger than the surrounding terrain, or they were built from materials and techniques that resist erosion in ways natural rock does not. There is another possibility that researchers have begun exploring. What if the structures we can see from orbit are only the tip of what exists? Mars is riddled with lava tubes, massive underground tunnels created by ancient volcanic activity. Some of these tubes are large enough to contain entire cities. They offer protection from radiation, temperature extremes, and surface erosion. If a civilization on Mars knew their planet was dying, the logical response would be to move underground. The surface structures might be the last remnants, the final monuments left behind by a people who retreated into the depths as their world collapsed above them. NASA has identified lava tube skylights near Pavonis Mons that are over 600 feet across. Ground-penetrating radar suggests these tubes extend for miles underground, with ceiling heights potentially reaching 300 feet or more. These are not small caves. These are structures large enough to house populations, agriculture, manufacturing, everything a civilization would need to survive as the surface became uninhabitable. And here is where it connects to Earth. When we look at ancient human structures, we find the same pattern: underground cities carved into solid rock. The Derinkuyu complex in Turkey goes down 18 stories and could house 20,000 people. It was not built recently. Its origins are lost to prehistory. Why would ancient humans, without modern tools, excavate millions of tons of rock to create underground cities unless they had learned that lesson somewhere before? Unless they remembered that when the surface becomes uninhabitable, you go deep. The evidence on Mars does not prove a civilization existed there, but it creates a compelling case that deserves serious investigation rather than dismissal. We have a planet that was once habitable. We have structures that display non-random patterns. We have ancient human civilizations on Earth that built similar structures and claimed their knowledge came from the gods, from the sky, from somewhere else. The pieces fit together if we are willing to look at them without the bias of conventional thinking. Mars was home to something once. Whether that something was microbial life or advanced intelligence remains the question. But the physical evidence sitting on that planet right now, visible in thousands of orbital photographs, demands answers that geology alone cannot provide. And if those structures are artificial, if they were built by intelligent beings, then the next question becomes unavoidable. Where did those beings go when their planet died? Let me tell you something that will change how you see the Great Pyramid forever. This structure, sitting on the Giza plateau for over 4,000 years, is not just a pile of stones. It is a mathematical equation carved into 6 million tons of limestone and granite, and the equation it represents should not exist in 2500 BC. The Great Pyramid aligns to true north with an accuracy of 3/60ths of 1 degree. To put that in perspective, modern architects using laser technology and GPS struggle to achieve that level of precision. The ancient Egyptians supposedly did it with copper tools, wooden stakes, and shadow measurements. Except there is a problem with that explanation. The alignment is not just close to true north, it is closer to true north than the Royal Observatory in Greenwich, England, built in 1675 with all the scientific instruments of the Renaissance period. How does a Bronze Age culture achieve that? The pyramid sits at exactly 29.9792 degrees north latitude. Write that number down. 29.9792. Now take the speed of light in a vacuum, measured in meters per second, 299,792,458 meters per second. The coordinates of the Great Pyramid match the speed of light to 5 decimal places. The speed of light, a constant that was not officially measured until 1850 by French physicist Hippolyte Fizeau, is encoded in the location of a structure built 3,000 years before the scientific method even existed. Coincidence, the skeptics say, random chance. But the mathematical impossibilities do not stop there. The height of the pyramid, when multiplied by 1 billion, gives you the distance from Earth to the Sunday, 93 million miles, the astronomical unit that defines our place in the solar system. The perimeter of the pyramid's base, divided by twice its height, gives you pi, 3.14159, calculated to multiple decimal places. Pi was not formally calculated until the Greek mathematician Archimedes worked it out in 200 BC, over 2,000 years after the pyramid was already standing. The ratio of the pyramid's height to its base perimeter equals the ratio of a circle's radius to its circumference. This is not approximate geometry. This is exact mathematical encoding. Every measurement, Every angle, every proportion feeds into a system of knowledge that transcends simple tomb construction. And yet we are supposed to believe this was built by a civilization that had not invented the wheel yet for construction purposes. A civilization whose official written records contain no blueprints, no technical documents, no instruction manuals for creating the most precisely engineered structure in the ancient world. Let us talk about the stones themselves. 2.3 million blocks, each weighing on average 2.5 tons. Some of the granite blocks in the King's Chamber weigh 70 tons. 70 tons. These blocks were quarried at Aswan, 500 miles up the Nile, transported somehow to Giza, lifted into position hundreds of feet above ground, and placed with tolerances measured in fractions of inches. Modern construction cranes can lift 70 tons, but they require steel cables, hydraulic systems, computer controls, and stable ground conditions. The ancient Egyptians had rope made from papyrus and date palm fibers. They had wooden sledges and copper saws. According to conventional archaeology, they moved these massive blocks using ramps made of mud brick and limestone rubble. Engineers have attempted to replicate this feat. They fail consistently, not because they lack effort or resources, but because the physics do not work. A ramp long and gradual enough to haul 70-ton blocks to the height of the King's Chamber would need to be over a mile long and contain more material than the pyramid itself. No evidence of such ramps exists. No debris fields of the scale required. No tool marks on the stones indicating they were dragged across rough surfaces. What the stones do show is something more mysterious. The blocks fit together so tightly that you cannot slip a piece of paper between them. No mortar, no adhesive, just stone on stone, pressed together with such precision that 4,000 years of earthquakes have not shifted them apart. The corners remain true. The edges remain sharp. The structure has settled less than half an inch, despite sitting on desert sand and bearing millions of tons of weight. This is not Bronze Age technology. This is precision engineering that rivals or exceeds modern capability. Inside the pyramid, the precision becomes even more disturbing. The King's Chamber is lined with granite blocks weighing up to 80 tons each, cut and polished to optical flatness. The chamber measures exactly 10 by 20 Egyptian royal cubits, with a height of 11.16 cubits. These are not arbitrary numbers. They encode the golden ratio, the mathematical constant that appears throughout nature in the spiral of galaxies, the structure of DNA, the proportions of the human body. The coffer in the King's Chamber is carved from a single block of chocolate-colored granite. It has been measured by laser scanning equipment and found to have internal dimensions that match the Ark of the Covenant as described in the biblical book of Exodus. Its external volume multiplied by 2 equals its internal volume multiplied by pi. This level of mathematical integration does not happen by accident. Someone calculated these dimensions for a specific purpose. And then there are the shafts. 4 narrow passages, roughly 8 inches square, that run from the King's Chamber and the Queen's Chamber up through the body of the pyramid. For decades, archaeologists claimed these were air shafts, built to ventilate the chambers during construction, except they do not open to the outside. They stop just short of the pyramid's surface, sealed by stone blocks. In 1964, astronomer Virginia Trimble and Egyptologist Alexander Badawi discovered something that changed everything. They calculated the angle of the southern shaft from the King's Chamber and projected its trajectory into the night sky. The shaft pointed directly at Orion's belt, as it would have appeared in 2500 BC. The northern shaft pointed at the star Thuban, which served as the North Star during the Old Kingdom period. The shafts from the Queen's Chamber performed the same trick. The southern shaft aligned with Sirius, the brightest star in the sky and the celestial representation of the goddess Isis. The northern shaft pointed to the star Kochab in Ursa Minor. These were not ventilation passages. They were stellar alignment mechanisms, built to connect the chambers with specific points in the heavens. Why? What purpose could that serve unless the builders believed the soul of the pharaoh needed a roadmap to the stars? Unless the pyramid itself was a machine designed to facilitate some kind of transformation or journey that we no longer understand. But here is where it gets truly strange. There are no hieroglyphics in the Great Pyramid. None. Not a single wall inscription, No cartouche of the pharaoh who supposedly built it, no religious texts or prayers or dedications. Every other Egyptian tomb is covered in hieroglyphics. The walls are illustrated with scenes from the Book of the Dead, instructions for the afterlife, spells and incantations to protect the deceased. The Great Pyramid contains nothing. The only mark ever found was a crude graffiti scrawl in a relieving chamber above the king's chamber, supposedly showing the name of Pharaoh Khufu. That mark was discovered by Colonel Howard Vyse in 1837, under circumstances that remain suspicious. Vyse was under pressure to find something that would date the pyramid and justify his expensive expedition. The mark appears in red paint, which should not have survived thousands of years in that environment. The hieroglyphs contained spelling errors that would not have been made by professional scribes of the Old Kingdom. Many researchers believe Vyse forged the mark to secure his place in history. If we remove that questionable evidence, we have no definitive proof of who built the pyramid or when. We only have the structure itself, sitting there, daring us to explain it with insufficient theories and inadequate technology. Let me give you one more piece of the puzzle. Acoustic engineers have discovered that the king's chamber resonates at a specific frequency when sound is introduced. The chamber was designed, either intentionally or by remarkable accident, to amplify sound waves in the range of 100 to 114 Hz. This is the frequency range associated with deep meditation, altered states of consciousness, and what some researchers call dimensional shifting. When researchers chanted in the king's chamber, the granite walls vibrated, the coffer vibrated, the entire space became a resonance chamber, turning sound into physical vibration at frequencies that affect human consciousness. Was this a tomb or a transformation chamber, a burial place or an initiation temple for ceremonies we can no longer comprehend? The ancient Egyptians called the pyramid Ikhet, which translates to glorious light. Not tomb, not monument, light. What did they know about this structure that we have forgotten? And why, if the Egyptians built it, did their technology apparently decline afterward? The pyramids at Giza represent the peak of pyramid construction. Everything built later was smaller, cruder, less precise. Civilization is supposed to advance over time, building on previous knowledge to achieve greater things. Egyptian pyramid building went backward. The first pyramids were the best. Everything after was an attempt to copy something they did not fully understand. Unless the Giza pyramids were not Egyptian achievements, unless they were inherited structures, already ancient when the first dynasties arose, built by someone else who understood mathematics and astronomy and engineering at a level that would not be reached again until the modern era. Someone who encoded their knowledge into stone, knowing it would survive long after their civilization disappeared. The Great Pyramid is not a tomb, it is a message, and we are only beginning to learn how to read it. Before we go deeper into this mystery, I am curious. Where in the world are you listening to this right now? What time is it where you are? Drop a comment and let me know. There is something fascinating about people all across the globe, in different time zones, different countries, all drawn to the same ancient mysteries at the same moment. It reminds me that these questions about our origins transcend borders and cultures. We are all searching for the same answers. Now, let us talk about why these pyramids point to the stars, specifically to one constellation that appears over and over again in ancient cultures worldwide. A constellation the Egyptians believed was the gateway to the afterlife. A constellation that might actually be pointing us toward our true home. In 1983, a Belgian construction engineer named Robert Bovel was lying on the sand in the Arabian desert, staring up at the night sky. He was working on a project in Saudi Arabia, far from city lights, where the stars blazed with an intensity most modern humans never experience. As he gazed at Orion's belt, those three bright stars that have captivated humanity since the beginning of recorded history, something clicked in his mind. The three pyramids at Giza, 3 stars in Orion's belt, and they matched. Not approximately, not sort of. They matched exactly. The position, the alignment, even the relative brightness. The smallest star in Orion's belt, Mintaka, is slightly offset from the perfect diagonal formed by the other 2 stars, Al-Nilam and Al-Nitak. And the smallest pyramid at Giza, the Pyramid of Menkaure, is slightly offset from the perfect diagonal formed by the other two pyramids. Bauval went home and started calculating. He used astronomical software to recreate the night sky over Egypt as it would have appeared thousands of years ago, accounting for the precession of the equinoxes, the slow wobble of Earth's axis that changes which stars appear where over vast periods of time. And what he discovered would become known as the Orion correlation theory, one of the most controversial and compelling ideas in alternative archaeology. The three pyramids at Giza are a terrestrial map of Orion's belt, positioned on the ground exactly as the stars appear in the sky. But it goes deeper than that. The Nile River, flowing beside the pyramids, corresponds to the Milky Way, the river of stars that flows through Orion in the heavens. The other pyramids scattered across the Egyptian landscape, when plotted on a map, align with other stars in the Orion constellation and surrounding stellar formations. Egypt is not just a kingdom, it is a mirror of the cosmos, built by people who wanted to recreate heaven on earth, or by people who were remembering a home among the stars. Mainstream Egyptologists attacked Bauval's theory immediately. They called it pseudoscience, pattern-seeking, the desperate attempt to find meaning where only coincidence existed. But the numbers did not lie. The correlation was not approximate. When Bauval calculated the alignment using the positions of Orion's belt in 10,500 BC, the match became even more precise. The pyramids were not just reflecting Orion as it appeared when they were supposedly built, they were reflecting Orion as it appeared during a much earlier epoch, 10,500 BC. That date keeps appearing in alternative research. It is the end of the Younger Dryas period, a catastrophic climate event that saw global temperatures plunge, ice sheets advance, and widespread extinction of megafauna. It is also, according to geological evidence, approximately when the Sphinx shows signs of water erosion, suggesting it existed during a time when the Sahara received regular rainfall, a time thousands of years before the first Egyptian dynasty. But why Orion? Of all the constellations, of all the stars, why did the ancient Egyptians obsess over this particular formation? In Egyptian mythology, Orion was not just a constellation, it was Osiris, the god of death and resurrection, the lord of the underworld, the judge of souls. The pyramid texts, carved into the walls of later pyramids, state explicitly that the pharaoh's soul would ascend to Orion after death. O king, you are this great star, the companion of Orion, who traverses the sky with Orion, who navigates the underworld with Osiris. The Egyptians believed their kings came from Orion and returned to Orion, not metaphorically, literally. They built their greatest monuments as gateways, as markers, as technology to facilitate that journey, and they aligned everything to make sure the connection remained clear across millennia. Now here is where it gets unsettling. The Cydonia region on Mars shows the same pattern. Independent researchers analyzing the Cydonia complex discovered that the major structures, the face, the D and M pyramid, the other formations in the region, align with Orion's belt in the same configuration as the Giza pyramids. The angles are the same, the proportional distances are the same. The offset of the third structure mirrors the offset of Mintaka and the Pyramid of Menkaure. 2 planets, 2 sets of structures, 1 stellar template. You can call this coincidence. You can say researchers are seeing what they want to see, forcing patterns onto random data. But at what point does the accumulation of coincidences become a pattern? At what point does the pattern become evidence? The odds of 2 unrelated civilizations on 2 different planets, both choosing Orion as their celestial focus, both building pyramids, and both arranging those pyramids in configurations that match Orion's belt, are astronomically small. The odds of them doing it with the same mathematical precision, the same offset in the third structure, the same proportional spacing, approach 0, unless they were not unrelated civilizations, unless they were the same civilization, building the same message in 2 locations, ensuring that if one planet died, the other would remember. Orion occupies a unique position in the sky. It sits on the celestial equator, visible from every inhabited continent on Earth. In the northern hemisphere, it dominates winter skies. In the southern hemisphere, It appears inverted but equally prominent. Ancient cultures across the world, separated by oceans and millennia, all recognized Orion and gave it special significance. The Sumerians associated it with the hero Gilgamesh. The Greeks saw the hunter Orion, struck down by the gods for his arrogance. The Maya called it the cosmic turtle, the place where creation began. The Hopi people of North America tell stories of their ancestors coming from the stars of Orion before descending to Earth. Australian Aboriginal traditions speak of Orion as the great canoe that carried the first people across the sky ocean. Why did every culture see Orion as the origin point? Why did they all connect it to creation, to ancestors, to the place where souls come from and return to? There is an astronomical reason Orion might matter beyond mythology. The stars of Orion's belt are young, massive, hot blue giants burning through their fuel at tremendous rates. They are stellar factories, creating heavy elements through nuclear fusion, seeding the galaxy with the building blocks of planets and life. The Orion Nebula, visible as a fuzzy patch below the belt, is one of the most active star-forming regions near Earth, a cosmic nursery where new solar systems are being born right now. If an advanced civilization wanted to mark the origin of life, the source of the elements that make up our bodies, they would point to Orion. It is not just a constellation. It is a stellar landmark, visible across vast distances, recognizable by any species that achieves astronomy. And it moves. The stars are not fixed. Precession causes the position of constellations to shift over time, completing a full cycle every 25,800 years. If you want to date a structure astronomically, you align it with stars, then calculate when that alignment was perfect. The Giza pyramids align perfectly with Orion in 10,500 BC. The shafts in the Great Pyramid point to specific stars as they appeared in 2500 BC. Two different dates, two different alignments. Either the pyramid complex was designed over an 8,000-year period, or it was designed all at once to encode two specific moments in time. A beginning and a remembrance. A founding and a rebuilding. What happened in 10,500 BC that was important enough to memorialize in the largest stone structures ever built? What event needed to be recorded so desperately that it was carved into millions of tons of rock and aligned with the stars to ensure future generations would know when it occurred? Catastrophe. The kind of planetary catastrophe that destroys civilizations and forces survivors to start over. The geological record shows it happened on Earth during the Younger Dryas. The Martian surface shows it happened there when the atmosphere was stripped away. Two planets, two disasters. And in both cases, monuments pointing to Orion, the constellation ancient people associated with death and resurrection. You die on one world, you are reborn on another, and you leave behind a map so those who come after will know where you came from and where you went. The Orion connection is not about mythology. It is not about ancient people making up stories to explain stars they did not understand. It is about a deliberate, calculated effort to encode specific information into structures that would survive any catastrophe. Information about location, about time, about origin. The pyramids are not tombs. They are not temples. They are markers. Signposts left by people who knew they had to preserve their knowledge before everything they had built disappeared. And they pointed those signposts at Orion because Orion was home, or the way home, or the place everyone came from before Earth, before Mars, before humanity scattered itself across the solar system and forgot where it started. When you look at Orion tonight, remember that every culture that ever looked at those three stars felt something. Recognition, memory, the sense that those stars meant something more than just distant suns burning in the void. Maybe they were right. The oldest religious texts in human history are not the Bible, not the Vedas, not the Epic of Gilgamesh. They are the pyramid texts, carved into the walls of the Pyramid of Unas at Saqqara around 2400 BC. These inscriptions were not meant for human eyes. They were carved inside sealed chambers, in darkness, meant only for the soul of the dead pharaoh to read as he made his journey to the afterlife. And what those texts say is shocking. They do not describe the pharaoh descending into an underworld beneath the earth. They describe him ascending, flying, traveling through the sky to reach the stars. Utterance 245 states it plainly. The king appears as a star. He is the one who navigates the sky. He travels to the starry sky, to the place where the gods are. Not where the gods live metaphorically, where the gods are, physically, in the stars. Utterance 267 goes further. The sky has strengthened for you the rays of the sun, so that you may lift yourself to heaven as the eye of Ra. Your bones are the gods and goddesses who are in the sky. The pharaoh does not become like the gods. He becomes the gods. His physical body transforms into stellar material. He returns to the place where his essence originated. This is not poetic language. Ancient Egyptian was a precise language, developed for record-keeping and technical documentation. When the pyramid texts describe the pharaoh flying through the sky, they use the same grammatical constructions used to describe boats sailing on the Nile or workers moving stone. Action, movement, physical travel. The texts describe technology. The sky is given to you. The earth is given to you. This great one whom you have found on your way carries you. The ladder is bound together for you by Ra. A ladder to the sky. A mechanism. Something constructed that allows ascent from earth to the celestial realm. And where does the pharaoh go? You will reach the sky as Orion. Your soul will be as effective as Sothis. Orion and Sothis, which is the Egyptian name for Sirius. Always those stars. Always that destination. The god Osiris was explicitly identified with Orion. His wife Isis was identified with Sirius. Their son, Horus, with whom the living pharaoh was identified, represented the link between Earth and the stars. This was not mythology created to explain natural phenomena. This was genealogy, family history. The Egyptians were telling anyone who read their texts that their rulers descended from beings who came from Orion and Sirius. But it goes back further than the pyramid texts. Egyptian tradition, recorded by the priest Manetho in the 3rd century BC, claimed that before the human dynasties ruled Egypt, the country was governed by gods, not god-kings. Not humans claiming divine status. Actual gods who walked the earth and ruled for thousands of years. Manetho's history divides Egyptian rulership into distinct periods. First came the rule of the gods themselves. 7 great gods who reigned for 12,300 years. Then came the demigods, the children of gods and humans, who ruled for another 1,000 years. After them came the Shemsu Hor, the followers of Horus, who ruled for 13,420 years. Only after all this, according to Manetho, did human dynasties begin. Modern Egyptologists dismiss this chronology as mythological inflation, the ancient equivalent of fan fiction. But Manetho was not writing fiction. He was the head librarian at the Library of Alexandria, with access to documents and records that no longer exist. He based his history on sources that went back to the very beginning of Egyptian civilization, and every Egyptian king list, whether the Turin Papyrus, the Palermo Stone, or the Abydos king list, references rulers who preceded the first dynasty. The Turin Papyrus, one of the most complete king lists, contains a section that lists rulers called the Venerables of Memphis and others simply called spirits. The papyrus is damaged, but the surviving portions show reign lengths measured in hundreds of years. These were not symbolic reigns. The document is a chronological record, listing kings in sequence with specific years of rule. If we take these texts at face value, Egyptian civilization extends back not 4,500 years but over 36,000 years. 36,000 years of continuous culture, knowledge, and rulership. And the earliest rulers were not human. The name Shemsu Hor deserves attention. Followers of Horus. Who were they? Egyptian texts describe them as the wise ones, the builders, the keepers of knowledge. They possessed abilities that later Egyptians could not replicate. They built the original temples. They established the astronomical alignments. They created the mystery schools where the deepest secrets of the universe were taught. And then they disappeared. Not gradually. Suddenly. The texts suggest a catastrophe, a great flood, a time when the sky came down to earth and everything was destroyed. After this event, the Shemsu Hor were gone, and human dynasties began the long process of trying to preserve and recreate what had been lost. This matches the Younger Dryas boundary event at 10,800 BC, a global catastrophe marked by mass extinctions, rapid climate change, and the disappearance of numerous advanced cultures around the world. The date when Orion's belt aligned perfectly with the Giza pyramids. The date when something fundamental changed in human history. What if the Shemsu Hor were not Egyptian? What if they were Martian refugees, survivors of their planet's catastrophe, who arrived on Earth with advanced knowledge and tried to rebuild their civilization in a new world? The Egyptians called them followers of Horus, but Horus was the god of the sky, the celestial ruler. Followers of the sky, god, people who came from the sky. Look at how the Egyptians depicted their gods: humanoid figures with elongated skulls, large eyes, tall, thin bodies. Artists do not invent entirely from imagination. They draw what they see or what they have been told existed. For 3,000 years, Egyptian artists consistently portrayed their gods and early rulers with physical features that do not match typical human proportions. And then there are the elongated skulls found in Egyptian tombs. Not all Egyptians had them. Only the royal families. Only those who claimed direct descent from the gods. These skulls were not created by artificial cranial deformation, binding infant heads to change their shape. They have greater cranial volume than normal human skulls. They have different bone structure. They are physiologically distinct. Mainstream archaeology attributes these skulls to cultural practices or genetic anomalies. But what if they represent genetic heritage from a different planet? What if the royal families preserved these traits because they marked legitimate descent from the original sky gods? Marry within the family. Preserve the bloodline. Keep the connection to Orion intact. The Egyptian obsession with resurrection makes more sense in this context. Osiris dies and is resurrected. The pharaoh dies and is resurrected in the stars. The entire religious system revolves around death being a transition, not an ending, a return to the original state, a journey back to the stars where the soul originated. The mummification process was not about preserving the body for an underworld journey, it was about preserving it for a stellar journey. The organs were removed and placed in canopic jars watched over by gods associated with specific stars. The body was oriented north-south, aligned with the celestial axis. The tomb was equipped with everything needed for a long voyage: food, tools, servants in the form of Shabti figures, boats to sail the cosmic waters. This was not symbolic. The Egyptians genuinely believed the pharaoh would physically need these items for a real journey to a real destination among the stars. And they believed this because their ancestors had made that journey, from Mars to Earth, from a dying world to a living one. The Book of the Dead, a later compilation of religious texts, contains a passage that researchers often overlook. Spell 462 states, "I have come from the island of fire, having filled my body with magic. I am like unto those who are in the island of fire." The island of fire, not hell, not a metaphor for purification. An island that burns, a place of intense heat and flame. Mars, before it died, would have been visible from Earth as a bright red point of light, a burning island in the sky. And the text says the speaker came from there, filled with magic, which is what the Egyptians called advanced knowledge and technology. There is another text, less famous but equally revealing. The Edfu building texts, carved on the walls of the Temple of Horus at Edfu, describe the creation of sacred spaces by beings called the Builder Gods and the Seven Sages. These beings came to Egypt in the early primeval age and established the first temples on virgin ground, creating the models that all later temples would follow. The texts describe these builder gods arriving from the homeland of the primeval ones, a place that was destroyed by water. They came in ships. They brought knowledge of astronomy, mathematics, and sacred architecture. They taught the early Egyptians how to align structures with the stars, how to encode knowledge in stone, how to create spaces that connected Earth with the heavens. And then they left, or died, or ascended back to the stars. The texts are unclear about their departure, but they are clear that the wisdom they brought became the foundation of Egyptian civilization. Everything the pharaohs knew, everything the priests taught in the mystery schools, everything encoded in the pyramids and temples, came from these beings who arrived from a destroyed homeland in the primeval age. A destroyed homeland. Mars. The homeland of the primeval ones who brought their knowledge to Earth and tried to preserve it through religion, through architecture, through texts carved in stone that would outlast any catastrophe. The gods of Egypt were not imaginary. They were not superstitious explanations for natural forces. They were memories. Genetic memories, cultural memories, passed down through millennia, growing more distorted with each generation but never entirely forgotten. The memory that humanity came from somewhere else. That the knowledge we possess was not developed here, but brought here. That we are, in the most literal sense, children of the stars. And if you want to go home, you follow the map. You build pyramids aligned with Orion. You preserve the knowledge in texts and temples. You wait for the day when your descendants develop the technology to read the message and make the return journey. The Egyptians were not worshipping gods. They were maintaining a connection to ancestors who came from the sky, and they were leaving instructions for how to find the way back. Dr. John Brandenburg has credentials that cannot be dismissed lightly. Plasma physicist, former consultant to NASA, specialist in propulsion technologies and space exploration. He has published peer-reviewed papers on advanced physics and worked on projects involving the future of human spaceflight. This is not someone prone to wild speculation or conspiracy theories, which is why his conclusion about Mars is so disturbing. Mars, according to Dr. Brandenburg's analysis of isotopic data collected by multiple Mars missions, was destroyed by nuclear explosions, not natural disasters, not asteroid impacts, nuclear weapons. I know how that sounds, but before you dismiss it, consider the evidence he presents. The Mars Odyssey orbiter and Mars reconnaissance missions detected unusual concentrations of radioactive isotopes in the Martian atmosphere and surface soil. Specifically, xenon-129, a radioactive isotope that does not occur naturally in the concentrations found on Mars. On Earth, xenon-129 is produced in significant quantities by only one process: nuclear fission. It is a signature isotope of thermonuclear detonation. The concentration of xenon-129 inches Mars's atmosphere is approximately 2.5 times higher than would be expected from natural processes. This excess cannot be explained by cosmic ray bombardment or radioactive decay of primordial elements. The distribution pattern is wrong. The isotopic ratios are wrong. According to Brandenburg's calculations, the only mechanism that produces this specific signature is a nuclear explosion, or more accurately, multiple nuclear explosions in the megaton range. But there is more. The distribution of uranium and thorium on the Martian surface shows anomalies that parallel what we observe at nuclear test sites on Earth. These radioactive elements are not evenly distributed across Mars. They cluster in two specific regions, Cydonia Mensa and Galaxius Chaos, the same regions where anomalous structures appear in orbital imagery, the same regions that some researchers identify as possible archaeological sites. Brandenburg's hypothesis is that these were population centers, cities, and they were deliberately targeted and destroyed by nuclear weapons in an ancient planetary war. The evidence, he argues, points to a civilization that was advanced enough to have nuclear technology turning that technology against itself in a final, catastrophic conflict. The mainstream scientific community rejects this theory. They argue that the isotopic signatures can be explained by natural solar-wind interactions or ancient volcanic activity. But Brandenburg has countered every conventional explanation with data that does not fit. Solar wind cannot produce the concentrated hotspots of radioactive material. Volcanic processes do not create the specific isotopic ratios observed. The signatures match nuclear explosions. Period. Let us assume for a moment that Brandenburg is wrong about nuclear war. That still leaves us with the larger question: what killed Mars? Because something absolutely destroyed that planet's ability to support life, and it happened relatively quickly in geological terms. Mars once had a magnetic field comparable to Earth's. We know this from magnetized rocks in the Martian crust, frozen evidence of ancient magnetic activity. A planetary magnetic field is generated by a liquid iron core rotating and creating a dynamo effect. It is essential for life. because it deflects solar wind and cosmic radiation that would otherwise strip away the atmosphere and sterilize the surface. Approximately 3.7 billion years ago, Mars's magnetic field shut down completely. The core stopped generating the protective shield, and the planet was exposed to the full force of the sun's particle stream. Over the next several 100 million years, the atmosphere was progressively stripped away. Water evaporated into space. Surface temperatures plummeted. Radiation levels became lethal to any complex life. But here is the critical question. Why did the magnetic field stop? Planetary cores do not just turn off for no reason. They are massive, planet-scale mechanisms driven by internal heat and rotation. For Mars's core to stop generating a magnetic field, something would need to disrupt the internal dynamics of the entire planet. One possibility is a massive impact. An asteroid or comet large enough to shock the entire planetary structure, disrupting the core's rotation and shutting down the dynamo. The northern hemisphere of Mars shows evidence of a colossal impact in its distant past. The Borealis Basin, covering 40% of the Martian surface, is the largest impact crater in the solar system. If an object that size struck Mars with sufficient force, it could potentially have disrupted the core. But there is another possibility: internal detonation. If a civilization on Mars developed nuclear weapons and used them not just on the surface, but in deep underground facilities, attempting to access geothermal energy or build subterranean cities, could sustained nuclear detonations deep within the crust affect the magnetic field? Could they have literally bombed their own planet to death from the inside out? It sounds like science fiction until you consider what humanity has already done to Earth. We have detonated over 2,000 nuclear weapons in tests alone. We have drilled holes miles deep into the crust. We have fracked and mined and extracted and injected materials into geological formations without fully understanding the long-term consequences. We are a young civilization with dangerous technology. Imagine what a civilization 1 million years older might have been capable of, and what mistakes they might have made. The timeline matters. If Mars lost its magnetic field 3.7 billion years ago, that predates any possibility of connection to Earth civilizations, which only emerged in the last 100,000 years or so. But what if the catastrophe was not the loss of the magnetic field? What if that was just the beginning of the end? What if Mars civilization survived underground for billions of years, adapting to the slowly degrading conditions until a final catastrophe made even underground survival impossible? There is evidence of relatively recent water flow on Mars, not billions of years ago, within the last few million years. Gullies on crater walls show signs of liquid water erosion that cannot be more than a few million years old. If water was flowing that recently, conditions were still potentially habitable that recently. Life could have persisted in protected environments far longer than the loss of the magnetic field would suggest. And if life persisted that long, intelligence could have developed. Cities could have been built underground, in the lava tubes we now know riddle the Martian subsurface. A civilization could have thrived beneath the surface while the exterior became increasingly hostile. They would have watched their sky turn from blue to pink. They would have watched their oceans evaporate. They would have watched their world die slowly over eons. What would such a civilization do? They would look outward, to the one planet in their solar system that still had everything they had lost: water, atmosphere, magnetic protection, Earth. The ancient Egyptians recorded a catastrophic event in their king lists. The time before the gods, when chaos reigned and the world was destroyed by water. The Sumerians recorded a similar event in the Epic of Atrahasis, describing gods who came to Earth to mine gold and who created humanity to be their workforce. The Hindu Vedas describe wars in the sky between gods, fought with weapons that sound remarkably like nuclear devices. Descriptions of bright flashes, mushroom clouds, cities turned to glass, radiation sickness. Every ancient culture has a flood myth, a catastrophe from the sky, a time when the world nearly ended and only a few survivors remained to restart civilization. What if these are not metaphorical stories but actual historical records, passed down through oral tradition for thousands of years? What if they describe the arrival of refugees from a dying planet, bringing with them the memory of a nuclear catastrophe that destroyed their world? The Younger Dryas impact hypothesis proposes that around 10,800 BC, multiple comet fragments struck Earth, triggering global wildfires, climate disruption, and the extinction of megafauna. The evidence for this impact is debated but growing. Nanodiamonds, magnetic spherules, iridium anomalies, all markers of extraterrestrial impact, appear in sediment layers dating to this exact period. But what if it was not a comet? What if it was spacecraft? Multiple craft entering Earth's atmosphere, burning up, crashing, survivors struggling to reach the surface of an alien world that was their last hope for continuation? The debris field would look identical to a comet impact. The global fires would match atmospheric entry at terminal velocity. The survivors would emerge into a world already reeling from catastrophe, and they would have to rebuild from almost nothing. They would bring what they could: knowledge, mathematics, astronomy, architectural techniques, genetic material, seeds of crops that do not originate on Earth, technologies that would seem like magic to the primitive humans already living here. And they would need those humans. Need them to help rebuild, to serve as a workforce, to interbreed with, to adapt their biology to Earth's environment, which is exactly what the Sumerian texts describe. The Anunnaki coming to Earth, creating humans through genetic manipulation, teaching civilization to humanity, and eventually leaving or dying out, leaving their hybrid descendants to carry on. Mars did not die empty. It died as a civilization was still fighting for survival. And when it became clear that survival on Mars was impossible, they launched one final exodus. Every ship they could build, every person who could be saved. A desperate journey across millions of miles of space to the only other habitable world in the system. Some ships made it, some did not. Those that crashed or burned up in Earth's atmosphere would leave the debris signatures we now attribute to comets. Those that landed successfully would disgorge refugees who had just watched their entire world die. They would be traumatized, scattered, desperately trying to preserve their knowledge while adapting to a planet with higher gravity, different atmospheric composition, different pathogens. They would build monuments, pyramids pointing back to Orion, the constellation visible from both Mars and Earth. A marker saying, "This is where we came from. Remember us. Remember home." They would encode their knowledge in stone, because they had just learned the hardest lesson any civilization can learn. Everything else can be destroyed. Libraries burn. Digital media decays. Even memory fades across generations. Only stone lasts. The Great Pyramid is not a tomb. It is a monument to catastrophe, a memorial to a dead world, a desperate attempt by survivors to ensure their story would not be completely forgotten. They could not save Mars, but they could save the memory of Mars. They could leave a message for their descendants, encoded in mathematics and astronomy and architecture, waiting for the day when humanity would advance enough to read it. And what does the message say? We came from the stars. We built great things. We destroyed ourselves. Learn from our mistakes. Do not let it happen again. Mars is a warning. Every dead ocean, every stripped atmosphere, every silent ruin photographed by our rovers. It is showing us what happens when a civilization fails to manage its technology, its environment, its own destructive tendencies. It is showing us our potential future if we do not learn the lessons encoded in those ancient pyramids. The Martians did not vanish. They are here. We are them. Their DNA, diluted across 100,000 years of interbreeding. Their knowledge, fragmented and distorted into mythology. Their monuments, still standing, still waiting to tell their story to anyone wise enough to listen. Mars died so Earth could live, and the pyramids are the tombstone for an entire world. Dr. Ellis Silver is an ecologist who spent years studying human biology from an evolutionary perspective, and he noticed something odd, something that kept bothering him the more he examined the evidence. Humans do not quite fit on Earth, not in the way every other species does. We are adapted to this planet, certainly. We survive here. But there are anomalies in our biology that suggest we evolved somewhere else, and were transplanted here relatively recently in evolutionary terms. Start with the most obvious problem: back pain. Humans suffer from chronic back problems at rates no other animal experiences. Our spines are curved in a way that creates constant stress on the lower vertebrae. We are the only species that routinely requires medical intervention just to manage the pain of standing upright. Why would evolution produce such a flawed design? Dr. Silver's hypothesis is that our spines evolved in a lower gravity environment. On a planet with less gravitational pull, our spinal structure would work perfectly. The curvature would provide flexibility without the constant compression we experience on Earth. Mars has 38% of Earth's gravity. A human body designed for Martian gravity would experience exactly the kind of spinal stress we see when transplanted to Earth's stronger gravitational field. Then there is childbirth. Human childbirth is uniquely dangerous compared to other mammals. The infant's head is almost too large to pass through the birth canal. Before modern medicine, maternal mortality rates were staggering. Women died regularly from complications that simply do not occur in other species. Why would evolution create a reproduction system this poorly matched between fetal head size and pelvic opening? Again, lower gravity provides an answer. In reduced gravity, a larger cranium relative to body size causes fewer mechanical problems during birth. The physics of the birth process would be fundamentally different. Women who gave birth in Martian gravity would face far fewer complications than women giving birth in Earth's gravity. We are watching our biology struggle against a gravitational environment it was not originally designed for. Human skin is ridiculously vulnerable to sun exposure. We burn easily. We develop skin cancer at high rates. We require clothing or shade for extended outdoor activity. No other mammal has this problem. Animals with fur, scales, or thick hide can spend their entire lives in direct sunlight without issue. Even other primates have better solar protection than humans. Why are we so poorly adapted to the star that provides our energy? If humans evolved on a planet with a thicker atmosphere, one that filtered more ultraviolet radiation, our lack of solar protection makes sense. Mars once had a much thicker atmosphere than it does now. During its habitable period, the atmospheric density would have provided significantly better UV protection than Earth's thinner atmosphere. Humans adapted to Martian sunlight would find Earth's more intense solar radiation harsh and damaging, which is exactly what we experience. Consider our circadian rhythm, the internal biological clock that regulates sleep and wake cycles. Human circadian rhythm naturally runs slightly longer than 24 hours. When isolated from external time cues, humans tend to drift toward a 24.9-hour cycle. This has been demonstrated repeatedly in studies where subjects live in environments without clocks, sunlight, or other time indicators. Their natural rhythm settles at just under 25 hours. Earth's day is 24 hours. Mars's day is 24.6 hours. Our biological clock is not synchronized with Earth. It is synchronized with Mars. We are living on a planet where every single day, our internal biology is slightly out of sync with the environment. We fight against this constantly, requiring alarm clocks, caffeine, and artificial lighting to force ourselves into Earth's 24-hour cycle. If we evolved on Mars, our circadian rhythm would be perfectly adapted. We would wake and sleep in natural harmony with the planetary rotation. The fact that we do not fit Earth's day length is biological evidence that we came from somewhere else. Then there is the mystery of human disease susceptibility. We get sick constantly. Colds, flu, infections, inflammatory conditions, autoimmune disorders. Our immune systems are hyperactive, attacking things that are not threats while missing things that are. We have allergies to plants and animals that are native to Earth. Our bodies treat pollen, a harmless natural substance, as a deadly invader. Why? Possibly because our immune systems evolved to fight pathogens from a different planet. When introduced to Earth's biosphere, our immune systems encountered an entirely new catalogue of microorganisms, allergens, and biological compounds. We are still adapting, still learning to distinguish Earth's harmless substances from actual threats. Our allergies and autoimmune conditions could be the result of an immune system that evolved in a Martian environment, suddenly being exposed to an Earth environment it was not prepared for. There is also the question of our genetic code itself. Human DNA contains approximately 3 billion base pairs. Of these, only about 2% actually code for proteins. The other 98% is often called junk DNA, non-coding regions that appear to serve no function. But increasingly, scientists are discovering that much of this so-called junk DNA is not junk at all. It contains regulatory elements, structural information, and sequences whose purpose we do not yet understand. Some of these non-coding regions show signs of being incredibly ancient, older than humanity, older than primates, potentially older than life on Earth. There are sequences that appear in human DNA that do not match the evolutionary timeline suggested by fossil records. It is as if portions of our genome were inserted from an external source rather than evolving gradually through natural selection. The theory of panspermia, proposed by scientists including Francis Crick, the co-discoverer of DNA's structure, suggests that life on Earth was seeded from space. Microorganisms, spores, or even genetic material arrived on comets or asteroids and jump-started biological evolution here. But what if it was not random? What if it was deliberate? What if a dying Martian civilization deliberately seeded Earth with their genetic material, ensuring that even if they did not survive, their biology would continue on another world? In 1996, NASA announced the discovery of ALH 84001, a meteorite from Mars that landed in Antarctica 13,000 years ago. Inside this rock, scientists found structures that looked like fossilized bacteria, tiny, tubular formations that resembled microbial life. The announcement was explosive, potential evidence of life on Mars. The scientific community immediately attacked the findings. The structures were too small, critics said. They could be mineral formations rather than biological. The evidence was inconclusive. But subsequent analysis, using more advanced technology, has continued to find features in ALH 84001 that are difficult to explain through purely geological processes. There are organic compounds. There are magnetic crystals of a type produced by bacteria on Earth. There are structural features that parallel bacterial fossils. If that meteorite contains fossilized Martian bacteria, it proves life existed on Mars. And if Martian bacteria can survive the journey from Mars to Earth inside a rock, carried through space for millions of years, then why not more complex genetic material? Why not spores, viruses, or engineered biological packages designed to survive interplanetary travel? We know Earth has been bombarded by Martian meteorites throughout geological history. Hundreds have been identified. Thousands more likely exist, undiscovered. Each one represents a potential vector for biological transfer from Mars to Earth. If even one of those rocks carried viable genetic material, it could have influenced the development of life on this planet. But the most compelling evidence is in our own consciousness. Humans have always felt out of place on Earth. Every culture, every religion, every philosophical tradition describes a sense of alienation, a feeling that we do not truly belong here. We look at the stars and feel longing. We describe death as going home. We build monuments pointing to the heavens. We dream of space travel, of reaching other worlds, of finding the place where we truly fit. This is not normal animal behavior. Other species do not gaze at the stars and wonder what is out there. They do not feel existential loneliness or question their purpose. They do not create elaborate mythologies about gods descending from the sky. That behavior is uniquely human, and it makes perfect sense if we are a transplanted species, carrying genetic memory of a home we lost, a world we can no longer return to but can never quite forget. There is a concept in psychology called genetic memory, the idea that experiences can be encoded in DNA and passed to descendants. It is controversial, but studies on trauma inheritance suggest that significant experiences can create epigenetic changes that affect subsequent generations. If true, then the trauma of losing an entire planet, of fleeing through space, of crash landing on an alien world, would be encoded in the DNA of every survivor. That trauma would pass to their children, and their children's children, diluting over time but never entirely disappearing. What we call the human condition, the sense of not belonging, the feeling that something is missing, the longing for something we cannot name, might be genetic memory, the echo of catastrophe imprinted in our DNA. We feel alien on Earth because we are aliens on Earth, refugees who forgot we were refugees. survivors of a disaster so complete that we lost even the memory of what we survived. Our biology tells the story our history has forgotten: lower gravity adaptation, solar sensitivity, circadian misalignment, genetic anomalies. We are Martians who have spent thousands of generations adapting to Earth, slowly changing to fit this environment, but still carrying the markers of our origin. And if that is true, then the pyramids are not just monuments, they are genealogical records, markers saying this is where your ancestors came from, maps pointing to a homeworld we can barely remember, technology encoded in stone, waiting for us to advance far enough to recognize what we are looking at. We are not searching for alien life on Mars, we are searching for evidence of our own ancestors. And every rover, every orbiter, every mission that touches Martian soil is an attempt, conscious or not, to go home. The Sumerians appeared out of nowhere around 4000 BC in Mesopotamia with a fully developed civilization. No gradual progression from primitive villages to cities. No archaeological evidence of slow cultural evolution. They simply arrived with writing, mathematics, astronomy, legal systems, complex architecture, and agricultural techniques that would not be improved upon for thousands of years. Their own records say they were taught by the Anunnaki, beings who came from the sky. Not metaphorical gods, physical beings who descended from the heavens, walked among humans, and shared knowledge that transformed scattered tribes into the first urban civilization on Earth. The Sumerian king list, like the Egyptian records, describes rulers who reigned for impossible lengths of time before a great flood destroyed the world and forced civilization to begin again. But here is what matters for our investigation. The Sumerians built ziggurats, massive stepped pyramids that dominated their cities. These structures were not tombs, they were called temples, but their actual function remains unclear. Each ziggurat had a flat platform at the summit, accessible only by long staircases, where priests performed rituals the general population never witnessed. The design is identical to structures on Mars. Satellite imagery of the Elysium region shows stepped pyramids with flat summit platforms. The architectural principles are the same. Build high, create levels, establish a connection between ground and sky. The ziggurats were not inspired by mountains, as mainstream archaeology claims. They were copies of Martian architecture, built by people who remembered or were taught by those who remembered what buildings looked like on the homeworld. The Sumerian creation myth describes the Anunnaki coming to Earth to mine gold. They genetically engineered humans by mixing their own DNA with primitive hominids, creating a worker species intelligent enough to follow instructions but obedient enough to serve. This story has been dismissed as mythology, but it describes genetic engineering with uncomfortable specificity, mixing bloodlines, creating hybrids. The result being modern humans who are different from other primates in ways evolution cannot fully explain. Gold is interesting. Why would advanced beings travel across space for gold? The metal has limited practical use in primitive technology, but gold is an excellent conductor, resistant to corrosion, useful in advanced electronics and, according to some theories, in radiation shielding. A civilization attempting to repair their planet's degraded atmosphere might need massive quantities of gold for orbital reflectors or atmospheric processors. Mining operations would require a workforce. Creating that workforce through genetic engineering would be faster than waiting for local intelligence to evolve naturally. The Sumerians also gave us the 7-day week, not based on lunar cycles, not based on solar years. 7 days, corresponding to the 7 celestial bodies visible to the naked eye: Sun, Moon, Mars, Mercury, Jupiter, Venus, Saturn. Mars held special significance in their cosmology. They called it the Red Star, associated with war and catastrophe, the planet that brought both destruction and transformation. Did they remember Mars as the world that destroyed itself and brought refugees to Earth? Was their association of Mars with war a cultural memory of the nuclear catastrophe that killed that planet? The mythological connection between Mars and conflict exists across cultures worldwide, suggesting a common origin for the association. Move to South America. The Nazca lines in Peru are enormous geoglyphs carved into the desert floor, only visible from the air. Hundreds of figures, some stretching over 600 feet across. Animals, geometric patterns, straight lines that run for miles across valleys and mountains without deviation. Created by the Nazca culture between 400 BC and 600 AD, supposedly as religious offerings to gods in the sky. But religious offerings do not need to be recognizable from the air. Humans on the ground cannot see these figures. They are designed for aerial viewing, for someone looking down from above, from aircraft, from spacecraft. Are they messages? Landing instructions? Navigational markers for craft that once flew these routes regularly before departing or being destroyed? The Nazca also built pyramids, step pyramids with flat summit platforms, the same design as the Sumerian ziggurats and the Martian structures. This pattern repeats across every ancient civilization: Egypt, Mesopotamia, Central America, South America, Southeast Asia, all building pyramids with similar proportions, all associating these structures with gods from the sky, all claiming their knowledge came from beings who descended from the heavens. In Bolivia sits Pumapunku, part of the Tiwanaku complex. This site contains stone blocks, cut with precision that modern engineers struggle to explain. Perfectly flat surfaces spanning several feet, precise 90-degree angles carved into diorite, one of the hardest stones on Earth. Interlocking cuts that fit together like complex puzzles. No tool marks. No evidence of the copper and stone implements that supposedly created these cuts. The blocks at Pumapunku look machine-made, laser-cut, processed in ways that should not be possible for a culture that had not discovered iron yet. Some blocks weigh over 100 tons and were transported from quarries miles away across mountainous terrain. The site sits at 13,000 feet above sea level, where the thin air makes physical labor exponentially more difficult. Mainstream archaeology dates Pumapunku to around 600 AD, but the site shows evidence of much greater age. Water erosion. Seismic damage from earthquakes that geological records suggest occurred thousands of years earlier than the conventional dating. Some researchers argue Pumapunku is a remnant of a pre-flood civilization built using technology that was lost when Catastrophe destroyed the original builders. The architectural style matches nothing else in the region. It appears fully developed with no primitive precursors, as if the builders arrived with complete knowledge and simply implemented it without the trial and error that characterizes technological development, just like the Sumerians, just like the Egyptians. Advanced knowledge appearing suddenly in populations that show no gradual progression toward that sophistication. Now move forward in time to Göbekli Tepe in Turkey, excavated beginning in 1995. This site rewrote everything archaeologists thought they knew about the development of civilization. Massive stone circles with carved pillars weighing up to 20 tons, arranged in complex patterns, decorated with sophisticated reliefs of animals and abstract symbols. The dating is what makes Göbekli Tepe revolutionary. 11,600 years old. 11,600. That places it at approximately 9600 BC, firmly in the pre-agricultural period. This site was built by hunter-gatherers, by people who supposedly had not developed farming, had not domesticated animals, had not created permanent settlements, and yet they quarried and transported 20-ton stones, carved intricate designs, and constructed astronomically aligned structures that required sophisticated engineering knowledge. Göbekli Tepe predates the pyramids of Egypt by 6,000 years. It predates Stonehenge by 6,000 years. It predates the invention of writing, the wheel, and pottery. It should not exist, but it does. And it suggests that advanced knowledge existed on Earth much earlier than conventional history allows. The date is significant for another reason. Göbekli Tepe was built just after the Younger Dryas event, just after the global catastrophe that marks the end of the last ice age, just after the time when, according to our theory, Martian refugees would have arrived on Earth fleeing their dying planet. The survivors landed in a world devastated by comet impacts and climate upheaval. They would need to establish themselves quickly. They would need monuments, markers, places to gather and preserve their knowledge before it was lost. Göbekli Tepe could be one of the first sites built by the refugees. A gathering place, a temple, a school where they taught the locals who survived Earth's own catastrophe, and when their purpose was complete, they buried it, deliberately filled in the excavations and covered the site, preserving it for future generations to discover. Why bury it? Perhaps because the knowledge was too dangerous. Perhaps because the locals were not ready. Perhaps because the survivors themselves were dying out, unable to fully adapt to Earth, and they wanted to ensure their message survived, even if they did not. Bury the truth. Let time pass. Wait for humanity to develop enough to understand what they are being shown. Every ancient culture tells the same story with different names. Beings from the sky who taught humanity agriculture, mathematics, astronomy, and architecture, who stayed for a time and then departed, ascending back to the heavens from which they came. The Egyptians called them the Shemsu Hor, the Sumerians called them Anunnaki, the Mesoamericans called them Viracocha and Quetzalcoatl, the Hindus called them the Devas, the Chinese called them the Yellow Emperor and his celestial court. Different names, same story. Advanced beings from elsewhere who civilized humanity and then left, promising to return. Every culture built pyramids to commemorate them. Every culture aligned those pyramids with stars. Every culture preserved myths about catastrophe, about worlds destroyed, about gods who fled dying realms to seed new ones. This is not coincidence. This is not independent cultural development producing similar myths through psychological archetypes. This is memory. Fragmented, distorted by thousands of years of oral transmission, but memory nonetheless. Memory of Mars, memory of the catastrophe, memory of the exodus and the arrival on Earth. The cargo cults of the Pacific Islands provide a modern parallel. During World War II, Allied forces built bases on remote islands, bringing supplies and technology the islanders had never seen. When the war ended and the bases were abandoned, the islanders built replica airplanes from wood and straw. They carved runways into the jungle. They performed rituals imitating the soldiers, hoping to summon the gods who had brought such wealth and then departed. Ancient humans did the same thing. They built pyramids imitating the structures the sky gods had shown them. They aligned them with stars, copying the astronomical knowledge they had been taught. They performed rituals, hoping the gods would return. Generation after generation, the rituals continued even as the original meaning was forgotten. The pyramids remained. The alignments remained. The memory, buried in stone and story, remained. We are not looking at separate civilizations developing independently. We are looking at a single source of knowledge dispersed across the globe by survivors who spread out from impact sites, teaching locals, building monuments, trying desperately to preserve what they brought from their dying world before they themselves disappeared into the genetic pool of humanity. The memory of Mars lives in every pyramid, every ziggurat, every stone circle aligned to stars, and if we are willing to see the pattern, the message becomes clear. We came from there. We fled catastrophe. We are the descendants of two worlds, and the structures we inherited are maps, pointing us back to the truth we forgot. In 2001, a Scottish systems administrator named Gary McKinnon did something that would change his life forever. He hacked into NASA computers, not for money, not for espionage. He was looking for evidence of UFOs and suppressed technology. What he found was far more interesting than what he was searching for. McKinnon accessed 97 military and NASA computers over 13 months. He was not a sophisticated hacker. He used readily available software to exploit default passwords and poor security. The ease of access itself was shocking, suggesting these networks were not expecting intrusion or were not particularly concerned about protecting certain information. While searching through directories, McKinnon found a folder labeled Non-Terrestrial Officers. Non-terrestrial officers, not astronauts, not personnel stationed on spacecraft. Officers operating outside of terrestrial jurisdiction. The folder contained lists of names and ranks, ship-to-ship transfers, assignments that made no sense in the context of NASA's publicly acknowledged programs. McKinnon also found images, high-resolution photographs of structures on the far side of the Moon and orbital objects that appeared artificial. Before his connection was traced and terminated, the United States government responded with unprecedented aggression. They charged McKinnon with the largest military computer hack in history, seeking extradition from the UK to face trial in America with potential sentencing of 70 years in federal prison for a non-violent intrusion that caused no damage and stole no classified weapons data. The response was disproportionate, unless what McKinnon saw was so sensitive that making an example of him became a matter of national security. McKinnon has maintained his story for over 20 years despite the legal nightmare it created. He saw evidence of a secret space program. He saw personnel assignments that implied off-world operations. He saw structures on celestial bodies that have no official explanation. And NASA's response was not to explain what he saw. It was to destroy him legally to ensure no one else went looking. But NASA's relationship with secrecy goes back much further than Gary McKinnon. In 1960, before the first American went to space, NASA commissioned a study called the Brookings Report. Officially titled Proposed Studies on the Implications of Peaceful Space Activities for Human Affairs, this document examined what would happen if space exploration discovered evidence of extraterrestrial life or artifacts. The report's conclusion was chilling. It recommended that evidence of extraterrestrial intelligence should be withheld from the public. The reasoning was that such a discovery would destabilize society, undermine religious institutions, and cause psychological trauma to populations unprepared for the revelation that we are not alone. The report specifically mentioned the danger of discovering artifacts on the Moon or Mars, suggesting that such findings would fundamentally challenge human self-perception. This was not a fringe conspiracy document. This was an official NASA-commissioned study that became policy guidance for how space agencies should handle revolutionary discoveries. And the policy it recommended was suppression. Classify the data. Control the narrative. Release only what the public can handle. If you discover ruins on Mars, do not tell anyone. With that context, look at NASA's behavior regarding Martian imagery. When the Viking 1 orbiter photographed the face on Mars in 1976, NASA initially released the image with a caption calling it an interesting rock formation. But the public reaction was immediate and intense. People saw what appeared to be a face, and they wanted answers. NASA's response was dismissal, tricks of light and shadow, pareidolia. Nothing to see here. But they never sent another mission to photograph Cydonia up close until 1998, 22 years later, when Mars Global Surveyor finally took higher resolution images of the region. Those images showed the face in different lighting conditions, and NASA declared the case closed. Just a mesa, natural formation. Skeptics were satisfied. The story died. Except researchers who analyzed the higher resolution images found that while the face was less dramatic in different lighting, the geometric structures surrounding it remained. The pyramids, the alignments, the mathematical relationships. NASA released images of the face, but carefully avoided detailed coverage of the broader Cydonia complex. They answered the question everyone was asking while ignoring the questions they hoped no one would ask. This pattern repeats throughout NASA's Mars missions. Images are released to the public after processing. Not raw data immediately. Processed data, which means data that has been examined, potentially altered, and approved for release. Researchers who want to see raw image data must submit formal requests and wait for approval. By the time independent analysts get access, NASA has had weeks or months to identify anything problematic and prepare explanations. There are documented cases of images being altered before release. Researchers comparing raw data files with publicly released versions have found discrepancies. Objects present in raw images that disappear in processed versions. Blurred areas where raw images show detail. Color corrections that change the appearance of structures. NASA attributes these to standard processing procedures, removing artifacts, correcting for sensor anomalies. But the effect is that the public never sees exactly what the cameras captured. They see what NASA chooses to show them. Whistleblowers from within the space agency have come forward over the years, though rarely with evidence substantial enough to overcome institutional denial. Donna Hare, who worked as a photographic technician for NASA contractors during the Apollo program, testified that she witnessed images being airbrushed before release. Objects in photographs of the Moon were removed or obscured, and she was told this was standard procedure for anything that could not be explained. Ken Johnston, who worked as a contractor during the Apollo missions managing photographs, claimed he was ordered to destroy Apollo images that showed artificial structures on the moon. He refused and kept copies, which he later attempted to release publicly. NASA discredited him, claimed he was never in a position to have access to classified materials, and dismissed his allegations. But Johnston provided documentation of his employment and security clearances that contradicted NASA's denials. The pattern is consistent. Individuals who claim to have seen evidence of anomalous structures or objects are isolated, discredited, and pushed out. Their credentials are questioned. Their employment records are disputed. The message is clear. If you talk about what you saw, we will destroy your credibility so thoroughly that no one will believe you. Why the secrecy if there is nothing to hide? NASA operates on public funding. Its mission is exploration and the advancement of human knowledge. If they discovered something revolutionary, something that would change our understanding of human origins, why would they suppress it? The Brookings Report provides one answer: social stability, religious implications, economic disruption. The revelation that humanity originated on Mars, that we are the descendants of refugees from a dead planet, would shatter foundational beliefs. But there is another possibility: control. If NASA knows about Martian artifacts and understands what they represent, that knowledge becomes power. Technology recovered from Martian sites could provide advances in energy, propulsion, materials, science. Whoever controls that technology controls the future. If you are NASA, or more accurately, if you are the military and intelligence apparatus that funds and directs much of NASA's classified operations, do you share world-changing technology openly? Or do you classify it, study it in secret, and maintain the advantage it provides? The question of whether humans have returned to Mars since the Viking missions deserves examination. Official records say no. No human has traveled beyond low Earth orbit since Apollo 17 in 1972, but the technology to send humans to Mars has existed since the 1980s. Nuclear thermal propulsion, which could reduce Mars transit time to months instead of years, was tested successfully in the 1970s and then classified. Budgets for black programs, military projects hidden from public oversight, run into the tens of billions annually with no public accounting of how the money is spent. Could a secret Mars program exist? Could humans have landed on Mars, explored the Cydonia complex, recovered artifacts, all without public knowledge? The infrastructure exists, the technology exists, the motivation exists. What does not exist is transparency. NASA's budget is public, approximately $25 billion annually. The National Reconnaissance Office, which operates spy satellites, has a budget comparable to NASA, but almost no public information about what it does. The true extent of black budget space operations is unknowable by design. Elon Musk's obsession with Mars is interesting in this context. He has staked his reputation and fortune on making humanity a multi-planetary species, with Mars as the target. SpaceX has developed reusable rockets, reducing launch costs by orders of magnitude. Musk speaks about Mars colonization not as a distant dream, but as an urgent necessity. He has stated repeatedly that humanity must become multi-planetary to survive. His timelines are aggressive. His commitment is absolute. Does Musk know something? Has he been briefed on classified findings? Is his Mars obsession driven by private knowledge that he cannot publicly discuss? Musk has security clearances through SpaceX's military contracts. He interfaces with intelligence agencies. He has access to information the public does not. His behavior suggests urgency, as if there is a deadline, a reason humanity needs to reach Mars sooner rather than later. Or perhaps he has simply looked at the same publicly available evidence we have examined, the same anomalies in Martian imagery, the same parallels between Earth and Mars structures, and reached the same conclusion. Mars matters. Mars holds answers, and whoever gets there first with the capability to properly investigate will unlock secrets that could change everything. NASA continues to send rovers to Mars. Curiosity, perseverance. Each mission collects data, photographs, samples. Each mission is carefully designed to search for signs of ancient microbial life. Not intelligent life, not artifacts, not structures, Microbial life. The parameters of the search are deliberately constrained. Find biological evidence that life once existed on Mars, but do not look for evidence of civilization. Why? If you are already on the surface with sophisticated instruments, why not point your cameras at Cydonia? Why not drive to the structures researchers have identified in satellite imagery? Why not resolve the debate definitively by examining these formations up close? The technology exists. The opportunity exists. But the mission parameters never include investigation of potential archaeological sites, unless they already know what is there. Unless Cydonia and similar sites have already been visited by missions that remain classified. Unless the public Mars program is a carefully managed disclosure process, feeding information slowly, preparing humanity gradually for revelations that are coming whether NASA controls them or not. The truth about Mars is emerging regardless of official secrecy. Independent researchers analyze the same imagery NASA releases. They find anomalies. They publish findings. They build cases that become harder to dismiss with each new piece of evidence. The control NASA once had over Martian information is eroding as technology democratizes space exploration and analysis. Whatever they know, whatever they are hiding, the window for secrecy is closing, and when it finally opens, the story that emerges will rewrite human history. The question is not whether NASA knows. The question is when they will stop pretending they do not. Something shifted in the last decade. After 40 years of sending robots to Mars while humans stayed safely in low Earth orbit, suddenly everyone wants to go to the red planet. NASA has plans. SpaceX has plans. China has plans. The European Space Agency has plans. Private companies, billionaires, even reality television producers have announced Mars missions. This is not scientific curiosity. This is a race. SpaceX founder Elon Musk has stated his goal is to establish a self-sustaining city of 1 million people on Mars by 2050. Not a research outpost, not a temporary base. A city. He has invested billions into developing Starship, a fully reusable spacecraft designed specifically for Mars colonization. The scale of his commitment is unprecedented in private space exploration. No company in history has devoted this level of resources to a single planetary target without immediate economic return. Musk frames his Mars obsession as insurance for humanity. If Earth faces catastrophe, asteroid impact, nuclear war, climate collapse, having a backup population on another planet ensures species survival. But listen carefully to how he describes the mission. He does not talk about Mars as a new beginning. He talks about it as a destination humanity must reach, as if we are supposed to go there, as if something is waiting for us. NASA's Artemis program plans to return humans to the Moon by 2025, establishing a permanent lunar base as a stepping stone to Mars. The official timeline projects human Mars landing by the late 2030s, but these are public timelines. What happens in classified programs under black budgets and military oversight remains unknown. The technology for Mars missions has existed since the 1980s. We could have gone decades ago if the political will and funding had been present. Now, suddenly, it is. Why? The discovery of subsurface ice on Mars changed the game. Water is life support, fuel, agriculture, everything a human settlement needs. But Mars has water in abundance beneath its surface. Ground-penetrating radar from orbital satellites has mapped massive ice deposits at accessible depths near the equator. This is not ice locked in polar caps requiring extreme environments to access. This is ice that drilling equipment could reach in habitable regions of the planet. The presence of accessible water makes Mars colonization logistically feasible, but it also raises a question. If water is there now, preserved beneath the surface for millions of years, what else is preserved? What structures, what artifacts, what technology might exist in the same environments we are now planning to excavate for human habitation? The lava tubes are particularly interesting. These are massive underground tunnels formed by ancient volcanic activity that riddle the Martian subsurface. Orbital imagery has identified tube skylights hundreds of feet across, suggesting tunnel systems large enough to contain entire cities. These tubes offer natural protection from radiation, temperature extremes, and micrometeorite impacts. They are the ideal location for human settlement. They are also the ideal location for a prior civilization to have built underground cities when the surface became uninhabitable. When humans go to Mars, when we start exploring lava tubes for settlement sites, we will inevitably discover whether anyone else used them for the same purpose. If Martian civilization retreated underground as their planet died, the evidence will be in those tubes, habitation structures, technology, possibly even preserved bodies in the cold, dry, radiation-protected environment that would act as natural cryogenic storage. Terraforming Mars has moved from science fiction to serious scientific discussion. The concept is to warm the planet, thicken the atmosphere, and eventually make the surface habitable without spacesuits. Proposals range from orbiting mirrors to reflect sunlight and melt polar ice, to releasing greenhouse gases from Martian soil, to asteroid redirection to deliver water and volatiles. The timescales are enormous, centuries or millennia, but the physics is sound. Mars could be made habitable again, but here is a thought. What if it has been done before? What if the Martian atmosphere we now see as a catastrophic loss was actually the result of a previous terraforming project that failed or was sabotaged? What if ancient Martians attempted to modify their planet to survive the magnetic field collapse, and the technology they used either did not work or made things worse? If we find evidence of atmospheric processing facilities, climate engineering equipment, or planetary-scale technology designed to preserve habitability, it would prove a previous civilization not only existed, but possessed capabilities we are only now beginning to theorize. The return to Mars is not exploration, it is archaeology. Every mission, every rover, every planned human landing is an archaeological expedition whether NASA acknowledges it or not. We are not going to Mars to search for microbial fossils in ancient lake beds. We are going to find out what happened to the civilization that built the structures we can already see from orbit. We are going to determine if those builders left anything behind that could help us avoid the same fate that destroyed them. And perhaps, on some level that governments will not publicly acknowledge, we are going home. If humanity originated on Mars, if we are the descendants of refugees who fled a dying planet, then returning to Mars is not exploration, it is reclamation. We are reclaiming our ancestral home. We are finishing the journey that was interrupted by catastrophe. We are survivors returning to see what can be salvaged from the ruins. The pyramids on Earth might be more than monuments to the past. They might be instructions for the future. Their astronomical alignments, their mathematical encoding, their positioning relative to stars, could be navigational data. Go to Orion. Follow these coordinates. Return to where we came from. The pyramids were built by survivors to guide their descendants back to the home planet when technology permitted. We are now developing that technology. Consider the psychological drive behind Mars exploration. It is not rational. The moon is closer, easier to reach, more practical for resource extraction and scientific research. Asteroids contain trillions of dollars in valuable minerals. The outer solar system has moons with subsurface oceans potentially harboring life. Yet the focus is Mars, always Mars. The red planet captures human imagination in ways no other celestial body does. We dream about Mars, we write stories about Mars, we build our space programs around Mars. This obsession cannot be explained by purely scientific or economic reasoning. Mars has less to offer than many other targets, but we are drawn to it, compelled toward it. As if something in our collective consciousness recognizes Mars as significant, as connected to us in ways we do not consciously understand. Genetic memory, perhaps. Cultural memory preserved in myths and monuments. Or simply the recognition that Mars holds answers to questions about our own origins that we have been asking for millennia. The billionaire space race is another clue. Musk, Bezos, Branson, and others are investing fortunes into space capabilities. These are not sentimental men. They are calculating businessmen who see opportunities others miss. What do they see in space, specifically in Mars, that justifies such massive investment with no clear short-term return? Are they positioning themselves to control Martian resources? To claim territory before governments establish jurisdiction? Or do they have access to information suggesting Mars offers something more valuable than minerals or scientific prestige? When the first humans land on Mars, and current projections suggest this will happen within the next 10 to 15 years, they will carry equipment designed to search for biological traces, DNA sequences, microscopes, spectrometers. But they will also carry cameras, ground-penetrating radar, and tools for excavation. They will explore lava tubes. They will visit Cydonia if mission parameters allow. They will look for what previous missions could only photograph from orbit. And when they find structures, when they find artifacts, when they stand inside facilities built by whatever intelligence once inhabited Mars, the questions we have been asking will finally have answers. Were they human? Were they our ancestors? Did they encode their knowledge in the monuments they left on Earth before the last of them died or departed? And most critically, did they leave behind technology, records, or instructions that could help us avoid repeating their catastrophe? The return to Mars is inevitable now. Too much momentum, too much investment, too many nations and organizations committed to the goal. Within a generation, humans will walk on Martian soil, explore Martian caves, and examine Martian anomalies up close. The truth, whatever it is, cannot remain hidden once boots are on the ground and eyes are in the tunnels. We are going back to Mars, and when we arrive, we will discover whether we are pioneers or simply the descendants of refugees finally finding the courage to confront the home we lost so long ago that we forgot it was ever ours. The journey is beginning, the answers are waiting, and the red planet, silent for so long, will finally tell us who we really are. We started this investigation with a simple observation: pyramids on Mars, pyramids on Earth, and we followed that thread through orbital imagery, ancient texts, biological anomalies, astronomical alignments, and conspiracy theories to arrive here, at the edge of a conclusion so vast it reshapes everything we thought we knew about human history. Let me be clear about what we have examined. We have not proven that Mars was home to the builders of the pyramids. Proof would require physical evidence, artifacts examined in laboratories, DNA analysis of Martian remains, technology recovered from underground cities. We do not have that. Not yet. What we have is a convergence of evidence from multiple disciplines, all pointing in the same direction. And that convergence demands attention. The face on Mars and the Cydonia complex display geometric relationships that match the Giza pyramids. Both locations encode the same astronomical alignments with Orion's belt. Ancient Egyptian texts explicitly describe their gods coming from the stars and their pharaohs returning to those stars after death. The pyramid texts are not metaphorical poetry. They are technical descriptions of stellar navigation written by people who believed this information was literal truth. Mars was habitable. This is not speculation. Orbital missions have confirmed that Mars once had liquid water, a thick atmosphere, and conditions suitable for complex life. Something catastrophic destroyed that habitability approximately 3.7 billion years ago when the magnetic field collapsed. But geological evidence suggests water flowed on the surface as recently as a few million years ago, meaning habitable conditions persisted far longer than the magnetic field collapse alone would suggest. Human biology does not perfectly fit Earth. We suffer from chronic back pain consistent with bodies designed for lower gravity. Our circadian rhythms sync better with Mars's day length than Earth's. Our skin lacks adequate protection for Earth's solar radiation. We give birth with difficulty because infant head size is mismatched to the birth canal in ways that make sense only if the birth process was originally designed for reduced gravity. These are not minor quirks. These are systematic mismatches between human physiology and terrestrial environment. Ancient civilizations worldwide describe gods from the sky who taught humanity agriculture, mathematics, astronomy, and architecture. They built pyramids and ziggurats pointing toward the heavens. They aligned these structures with Orion and Sirius with precision that should not have been possible for Bronze Age cultures, and they all claimed their knowledge came from beings who descended from the stars. The statistical probability of all these elements arising independently is vanishingly small. The probability of them converging by pure coincidence approaches zero. What we are left with is a pattern, and patterns have causes. I am not telling you what to believe. I am showing you what exists. structures on Mars that display non-random geometric relationships, pyramids on Earth that encode advanced mathematical knowledge millennia before such knowledge supposedly existed, biological anomalies in human physiology consistent with extraterrestrial origin, ancient texts describing stellar genealogy as literal fact, a planetary catastrophe on Mars coinciding temporally with massive disruption on Earth during the Younger Dryas, and a current space race focused on Mars with an intensity that cannot be explained by scientific curiosity alone. You can attribute each piece of evidence to something else. The face on Mars is pareidolia, the pyramid alignments are coincidence, human back pain is just poor evolutionary design, ancient texts are mythology, the Mars catastrophe has nothing to do with Earth. Taken individually, each explanation is plausible, but taken together, the conventional explanations require more coincidences than the alternative hypothesis. The alternative hypothesis is this: Mars was home to an advanced civilization. That civilization faced catastrophe, either from nuclear war, magnetic field collapse, or both. Survivors fled to Earth, the only other habitable planet in the system. They arrived during the Younger Dryas period, bringing knowledge, technology, and genetic material. They interbred with existing hominids, creating modern humans. They built monuments encoding their knowledge and pointing toward their origin. They established civilizations in Egypt, Sumer, South America, and elsewhere, teaching locals while slowly dying out or being absorbed into the human population. And they left behind markers, maps carved in stone, waiting for their descendants to develop enough to read the message and return. This hypothesis explains every anomaly we have examined. It accounts for the precision of ancient structures, the global distribution of similar architectural principles, the biological oddities in human physiology, the consistent mythological themes across cultures, and the current obsession with Mars exploration. It is a single explanation that unifies diverse evidence from archaeology, astronomy, biology, and planetary science. Is it correct? I do not know, but it deserves investigation beyond dismissal. It deserves serious scientific examination of Martian structures. It deserves archaeological exploration of sites like Göbekli Tepe, with the understanding that they may predate civilization as we define it. It deserves genetic studies examining the anomalous sequences in human DNA. It deserves honesty from space agencies about what they have found and what they are looking for. The truth is emerging whether institutions control it or not. Every Mars mission releases more imagery. Every advance in astronomical software allows better analysis of ancient alignments. Every DNA study reveals more complexity in human genetics. The pieces are assembling themselves into a picture that conventional history cannot contain. When humans finally stand on Mars, when we explore those lava tubes and excavate those structures, we will know. The evidence will be undeniable, or it will not exist. We will find cities, or we will find rocks. We will find technology, or we will find minerals. We will find answers, or we will find questions. But we will know. Until then, we live with uncertainty. And perhaps that uncertainty is intentional. Perhaps the builders of the pyramids, whether Martian refugees or ancient Earth geniuses, designed their monuments to preserve mystery until humanity was ready for truth. Perhaps the knowledge encoded in those structures is dangerous, the kind of information that destroyed Mars and could destroy Earth if discovered prematurely. Perhaps we are in a waiting period, a test to see if we develop wisdom before we develop the technology to read the full message. Or perhaps the message is simpler. Remember where you came from. Remember what you lost. Remember that planets can die and civilizations can fail. Remember so you do not repeat the mistakes that turned Mars from a living world into a frozen desert. We are Martian, or we are not. But the question itself matters. Asking where we came from, why we are here, whether we are alone, these questions drive exploration. They drive science. They drive the search for meaning that defines human consciousness. Whether the pyramids were built by Martian refugees or indigenous Earth geniuses, they represent the same impulse. The need to mark our existence, to encode our knowledge, to reach toward the stars and say we were here. We mattered. Remember us. If you found this exploration compelling, if it opened questions you had not considered, share it, discuss it, research further. The information is available. The evidence exists in peer-reviewed papers, orbital photographs, ancient texts, and biological studies. Read the pyramid texts, examine Cydonia imagery, study the Orion correlation, look at human physiology through the lens of planetary adaptation, form your own conclusions, and keep watching, because within our lifetimes, humans will return to Mars, and whatever they find there will rewrite the story of who we are, where we came from, and what we are capable of becoming. The pyramids are waiting. Mars is waiting. The truth, whatever it is waiting. And we are finally developing the tools to uncover it. The next chapter of human history is about to be written, and it begins when we step foot on the red planet and discover whether we are explorers or simply the lost children of Mars finally coming home. And if you made it this far, you might want to watch this again, because now that you know the full picture, the beginning will make a lot more sense. Thank you for joining me on this journey through mystery, evidence, and possibility. I am Mr. H, and this is Mystery History for Sleep. Until next time, keep questioning, keep searching, and remember that the greatest discoveries often hide in plain sight, carved in stone, encoded in stars, waiting for minds curious enough to see them. The story is not over. It is just beginning.